In this video, I'm going to go through absolutely every single feature contained within the FiLMiC Pro camera app and explain what each one is for. FiLMiC Pro has a lot of great features. Most of these features are the basic controls you'd find in any camera. Some are specific to smartphone filmmaking, and some others are unique to FiLMiC Pro. Now, I'm gonna try to go through every single button, every slider, every function contained within the app. So, well, wish me luck. Oh, by the way, FiLMiC Pro might operate differently, or just look a bit different depending on your device. This is especially the case with differences between iPhone and Android, as you'd expect. When I open up FiLMiC Pro, this is what I get. In the middle, there's a white circle and a white rectangle. FiLMiC Pro calls these reticles. I'm not sure if I used the word reticle before I started using FiLMiC Pro. But anyway, a reticle is basically a series of lines, or marks, which form a measuring or locating aid for some kind of optical device, like the crosshairs in a sniper's sight. If you don't see one or both of these, or they're red, then either you have one of the manual control wheels open, or the reticle is locked. If you just tap this button here a couple of times, you should have both reticles, but they will be red after doing that. So the circle is your exposure reticle, and the rectangle is your focus reticle. When they're white, they are unlocked, and when they are red, they are locked. You can lock and unlock them just by tapping them. In your native camera app, you probably also have a reticle which goes yellow when you lock it. But that reticle is for both exposure and focus. In FiLMiC Pro, that reticle has been split into two reticles, so you can control them separately. The reticles can be moved around the screen, just like the native camera app reticle, and they work the same way. Wherever you place the reticle, FiLMiC Pro will take the reading from that area of the screen. Only if they are white and unlocked. If they are red, locked, no change will take place. Just like with your native app, when you move the unlocked exposure reticle around the frame, it takes a reading from that area. So the idea is, you choose the area of the frame you want the camera to expose correctly. If the lighting is very even across the frame, it might not make that much difference, but if there's a wide contrast, like say with a window in the daytime, then one area might be overexposed or underexposed. So if I want to show what's outside the window, I place the reticle over the window. If I want to expose the room, I place it over somewhere in the room. Then I lock it before I start filming. If you don't lock the exposure reticle, the exposure will be on auto. So if I move the camera around, we can see the exposure adjusting live. If I start recording, it will continue to adjust live, just like with your native camera app on auto. If you double tap the exposure reticle, it changes mode. Oh look, what's this message? Dynamic tone mapping disabled. What's that about? Dynamic tone mapping is basically an HDR function. Software in the camera looks at different areas of the image and adjusts the exposure level, not for the whole frame, but for different parts of the frame. The most obvious example is when you're filming a landscape and the sky is way brighter than the land. The HDR software will try to even out the exposure, so you can see both the land and the sky. But this is not compatible with manual control, because the tone mapping function wants to adjust ISO differently for different parts. And when you use FiLMiC Pro for Android, it disables dynamic tone mapping. But when using it with iPhone, it cannot be disabled. So then you might lock exposure and parts of the image will continue to adjust. The focus reticle works similarly to the exposure reticle. Move it around to set focus. But in the Android version, the focus reticle is not in auto. If I move the camera around, the focus won't change. I need to move the reticle. So I'll put something close to the camera so you can see how this works more clearly. Move the focus reticle over the close object, now over the distant object. You can see the focus change. Again, normally we would tap to lock the focus reticle before hitting record. There is actually a way to set this to autofocus. Just double tap the reticle and it expands. This might be useful if you want the focus to adjust during the shot. For example, if you're vlogging or you just want to film live, and you want the focus to keep adjusting. When in this autofocus mode, you cannot move the reticle. It simply takes the focus from whatever is in the center of the frame. The autofocus reticle can also be locked the same way. To get back to manual, just double tap again. This white line here is the zoom control. Slide it up to zoom in and down to zoom out. I never really use this, but I just noticed that when I zoom in, the vertical slider line changes color and goes from green to orange and to red. So my guess is that this is some kind of quality indicator when you're using digital zoom. When I use FiLMiC Pro on my Samsung Note 20 Ultra, I know it can't access the telelens. So this is digital zoom only. And with digital zoom, you can end up with a really pixelated image if you zoom too far. So I think FiLMiC is just telling you that green is fine, orange maybe careful and not so good, and red is bad. The main reason for using FiLMiC Pro is for the manual controls. They can be accessed in a number of ways. The easiest way is to tap the manual control button, which is this circle with a kind of broken circle around it. An exposure control wheel slides out from the left and a focus or zoom control wheel slides out from the right. So tap again if you want to send them away again. You can also tap and hold each reticle to bring out the corresponding control wheel. In iOS devices, you can swipe from the left or right to bring out the wheel on that side. Swipe back to return it. I don't know if this is only Samsung devices, but I find I can only swipe the wheels away and not bring them out using this method. Note that in certain Android devices, opening manual control disables dynamic tone mapping. So all you do is swipe up and down on the wheel to adjust the setting. Moving the exposure wheel adjusts the exposure. Down for darker, up for brighter. Both ISO and shutter speed adjust at the same time. Shutter speed is at the bottom here and ISO at the top. Most likely you will want to fix your shutter speed and leave the ISO flexible. So move the wheel up and down until you find your desired shutter setting. Now tap to lock it and it turns red. Now when you move the exposure wheel, only ISO changes. So to avoid digital noise in the image, keep ISO as low as you possibly can. The three dots to the left of the exposure wheel are used to set your ISO bias. You can set it to low, moderate or high. If you set it to low, for example, FiLMiC Pro will do its best to aim for a low ISO number. Now personally, I never really use this feature. And actually sometimes when you're trying to lock shutter speed, you accidentally tap, or I do, tap one of these dots and then you can sort of mess up your exposure setting. So it's actually a bit annoying and I'd be quite happy if they removed this feature. To set focus, swipe the focus wheel up and down. This wheel also doubles as a zoom controller. Tap zoom to switch and now swipe the wheel up and down to zoom in and out. Both wheels can be programmed to change during a shot from set positions. Each wheel has these two tiny position markers. Move the wheel to the first position, tap on this middle line and the marker will slide round to that point. Move the wheel to the second position, tap the middle line again. Hopefully the second marker will move itself there. To set the pull in motion, tap the marker point you wish to move to. If the markers are far enough apart, you get a little arrow, so you can tap that to start it instead. There's two slider controls at the left and right edges of the frame. The left one controls the exposure pull speed. The right one controls the focus or zoom pull speed. I've personally never used an exposure pull. On the other hand, focus pulls can be very effective if done right. While you're in manual mode, if you tap the Live Analytics button, the A button, you will find that when you move the focus wheel, you get a focus peaking overlay. The green lines indicate which areas are in focus. If you move the exposure wheel, the zebra stripes overlay indicates which parts of the image are underexposed or overexposed. Blue zebras are underexposed, red zebras overexposed. To keep an overlay on permanently, you can select the required overlay from the four icons at the top. Top right is focus peaking, while top left gives you exposure zebras. The two middle icons are clipping and false color overlays. The clipping overlay shows you which parts of the image are being lost due to over or underexposure. Red areas represent blown out highlights, which will appear pure white in your video. Meanwhile, blue areas represent underexposed shadows, which will end up appearing black. The false color overlay again shows blown out highlights as red and underexposed shadows as blue, but adds a green overlay for correctly exposed areas as well. In devices with smaller or differently shaped screens, the audio meter does not appear on the right here. For example, on my iPad Pro, the audio level is at the bottom under the timecode counter. We have left and right channels displayed here. At the top is a peak meter, and this is a live indication of your audio peaks. You can see when I click my fingers, it creates an audio peak, marked by these two little lines at the top of the meters that remain there for a second or so. If either of these lines or the indicator at the top goes into the red, then your audio might have overload problems. The maximum you can go to without distortion of the audio is 0, so that's why audio is measured in negative numbers. Minus 15 dB, minus 25 dB, and so on. dB stands for decibels. Depending where you're outputting your video, you might want spoken voice to be at around minus 6 dB. When audio is mixed for a movie, for example, I believe spoken voice is set at around minus 10 or minus 12. Of course, you can push up the level when editing, but if you record too low, when you push up the audio, you will get more background hiss, which might ruin your audio. At the bottom, we have these letters, INT, and this stands for internal. So this is telling you that FiLMiC is using the inbuilt mic of your device. Like I say, some devices will have the audio meter at the bottom here, and all you get is a single level meter, no extra info. But you might also notice this tiny little white line here at the right. And this white line is the audio level controller. You can swipe it left to right to set audio level. If ever you find FiLMiC Pro is for some mysterious reason not recording audio, it might be that you've accidentally swiped this across, which is quite easy to do, so keep an eye out for that. This big white circle here is the record button. Tap to record and it goes red. Tap again to stop recording and it goes back to white. And that's all you need to know about that. Simple. To the left of the record button is a white triangle in a dark circle, like a play button. Tap this to open up the Playback Gallery. All clips which are recorded with FiLMiC Pro should be here until you delete or move them. When you record video, FiLMiC Pro stores the files in a special folder, which it creates when you install the app. To play a clip, just tap on it. Now it opens up in a bigger window and plays automatically. If you want to watch the clip without the information overlays, just tap on the video away from the overlay and tap again to bring it back. On Android devices, there's 5 buttons here. On iOS, there's 6 buttons. In iOS, you have the additional AirPlay button, which allows you to stream the video to compatible devices, like a monitor or TV. The scissors button allows you to trim your clip. For example, if there's only a part of the clip you want to keep, save space by trimming it. Move the handles at the end of the clip to resize it, and tap trim again. The next button looks like a roll of film, so that gives you a clue what it's for. With an Android device, when you tap this, you are asked if you want to copy or move selected clips. If you have a folder on your device you want to move or copy the clip to, use this button. In iOS, this button allows you to save the clip to your camera roll. In other words, the clip will appear in your main iOS Photos app. However, FiLMiC say this can result in a loss of quality of the video, especially if the clip is a de-squeezed anamorphic shot. The next button allows you to downsample your video. Perhaps you shot it in 4K, but you want to save memory space, so you can downsample it to HD, for example. In iOS, it gives you a choice of resolutions, but in my Android device it doesn't. The resultant copy that I created using this was the same resolution, so my guess is that it merely lowers the bitrate to reduce the file size. Next button is a share button. The iOS and Android versions look a bit different, but they have a pretty similar function, which is to share the clip to various places, like apps, social media, nearby devices, and so on. In iOS, you can use AirDrop to send a clip to a nearby Apple device, like a MacBook Pro, for example. I only recently tried this between my iPad and my MacBook Air M1 version, and wow, that was really fast. I was very impressed. The final button The red trash can deletes the clip. To get back to the gallery, tap the X in iOS or the down arrow in Android. For each clip, you get a lot of information displayed. At the top here is the title of the clip. If you've switched on content management, you will get a customized title. Otherwise, you get a series of numbers. So you get the duration of the clip, date when it was recorded, resolution, frames per second, audio codec and bit depth, and file size. See this star in the thumbnail? Tap that to mark a clip as a favorite. So this is useful if you have taken a load of clips and you want to select the best clips. Then, for example, if you want to transfer the clips to another device to be edited, you need only send the good clips. Notice also that the gallery uses the predominant color of the clip, and this just makes it a little bit easier to identify certain clips if you have lots of clips to scroll through. At the bottom, we have 5 buttons. First is a filter button, which allows you to filter your gallery by different specifications. And if you've used that star to select your favorites, toggling on favorites here will remove all the other clips. The next button is the select button. Tap to enable. Now you can select more than one clip at a time. Mostly this will be so you can send the good clips to another device or delete the bad clips. And once I select one or more clips, the next 3 buttons become available. Otherwise, they're grayed out. That's because these 3 buttons concern sharing, moving, and deleting clips. These 3 buttons have exactly the same function as they do in the playback window: camera roll, share, and delete. There's actually 2 other ways to delete clips. In Android, tap and hold the clip or swipe to the left. In iOS, you only have the swipe option. To close the gallery, tap on the screen away from it. Next to the gallery button is a cog icon. Tap this to open up the settings menu. Or should we say settings menus? Plural, because we are presented with 15 labeled buttons here, and one tap on the relevant button will open up more options. At the top of the resolution menu is a series of different sized rectangles. These rectangles are used to set the shape of the frame, and this is what we call aspect ratio. A frame's aspect ratio is the ratio between the height and width of the image. So the default setting is 16 wide by 9 high. 16 and 9 what though? Well, those numbers simply represent a ratio. In effect, it means for every 16 pixels of width, there is 9 pixels of height. For HD video, that comes out as 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels high. So now we have 17 by 9, 3 by 2, 1 by 1, and so on. So you can choose the shape of the video you want FiLMiC Pro to output. 1:1 for Instagram, for example, to 1.76:1 is the aspect ratio of the old ultra-wide Panavision movies. Now, some people think it looks cool to have such a widescreen look, and I will not be disagreeing with them. Now, did you notice when I selected a ratio different to 16 by 9, the crop source to overlay toggles on? What this means is FiLMiC Pro will output a video at the selected ratio. If you toggle this back off again, now the overlay acts only as a guide. Which one should you choose? Well, I would say the crop option is faster but removes part of the image. But the non-crop option means you will get a 16 by 9 version of the video, and you can crop it in your editor. So then the choice of ratio is just a guide. Why would you do that? Because you might want to adjust the framing later, and keeping the whole 16 by 9 image gives you that option. If you crop it in FiLMiC Pro, you will not get that option later. Below the ratio settings are 3 controllers with arrows each end. The top one is resolution. On both my iPad and my Samsung Note 20 Ultra, I can choose from ST 540p all the way up to 4K. If your device can't shoot 4K, then this option will not be available, obviously. My Note 20 can actually shoot up to 8K, but FiLMiC Pro is not able to access that resolution. Below resolution is the bitrate setting. You can choose from the lowest setting, economy, up to the highest, FiLMiC Extreme. Bitrate has a big effect on the quality of the video, as well as the size of the video file, and the demand on any graphics processor. When you choose bitrate, you are balancing between having the best quality against your available storage space and processing power. And quite often, people push their settings on FiLMiC Pro to the max, and they wonder why their phone overheats and FiLMiC Pro crashes. Well, the answer is often that your device can't handle what you've asked it to do. Bitrates can vary quite a bit depending on the device, and this is for 4K video. FiLMiC Extreme is 120 megabits per second, FiLMiC Quality 75 megabits per second, Standard 50 megabits per second, and Economy is 35 megabits per second. A video codec is software for compressing and decompressing video files. In fact, the word codec was created by combining the words encoder and decoder. Many smartphones now allow you to choose between two codecs, AVC, otherwise known as H.264, and HEVC, otherwise known as H.265. HEVC is the newer compression codec. As it's better at compression, it creates smaller files. However, the codec is still not compatible with all platforms and software. It also uses up more graphics processing power when playing or editing. Note that the HEVC codec is required to shoot 10-bit video. In compatible Android devices, below the codec setting is a toggle button for 10-bit HDR. In compatible iOS devices, i.e. iPhone 12 and later, this appears above the codec toggle button. By default, our smartphones shoot 8-bit color, but if you want to shoot with a color depth of 10-bit instead, switch this on. Why would we want to shoot 10-bit color? Video is currently only broadcast or streamed in 8-bit color. But for color grading, 10-bit gives you more digital information to work with, which means you're less likely to get banding, for example. The tonal gradations will be smoother. In Android, you just have 8 or 10-bit to choose from, but in iPhone 12, 8-bit is the default, then tap left for 10-bit or right for Dolby Vision. While Android devices like Samsung's have HDR10+, Apple has worked with Dolby to include Dolby Vision with their latest iPhone 12 range. HDR10 Plus and Dolby Vision are two competing HDR systems. Whereas FiLMiC Pro has a setting for Dolby Vision, there's no equivalent setting on Android FiLMiC Pro for HDR10 Plus. So if you have an iPhone, which should you choose? 10-bit, 10-bit log, or Dolby Vision? Well, 10-bit color gives you more to work with when grading, and 10-bit log version 3 promises you a flat profile, which is said to be even better in respect to that. Meanwhile, Dolby Vision also works to give you a higher dynamic range, but using a different method. If you want to export and edit Dolby Vision footage, you will need editing software which is compatible with Dolby Vision. But from what I've seen, this could be an extremely powerful feature. Next to resolution is frame rate. At the top we have a list of frame rates from 24 frames per second up to 240 frames per second. To the right of that you can choose between standard and time-lapse mode. You might notice that the 120 and 24 frames per second are unavailable. And that's because FiLMiC Pro will only allow those fast frame rates at reduced resolutions. In the manual it says 720p, but I found that I actually can access those high frame rates at 1080p in my Samsung Note 20 Ultra. No, this line with dots along it is not a new London Underground line map. It's actually what FiLMiC calls the motion slider. Now, the theory is that you can tap and drag the grey circle to create different motion effects. At first, I tried setting the record rate to 60 frames per second, thinking I would use the motion slider to set the playback frame rate. But it didn't work, and I tried on all my devices. So I tried starting with a 30 frames per second record frame rate, and then I found that it did work. Why is there a capture and a playback frame rate? Well, for example, if you shoot at 60 frames per second and play back at 30 frames per second, you will get a slow motion effect. To get this to work best, you should choose frame rates which work together. 30 frames per second is exactly 50% of 60 frames per second. So that should work. 24 frames per second is exactly 40% of 60 frames per second. So that should also work pretty well. The last setting in the frame rate menu is to do with shutter speed and how artificial light can cause strobing. Basically, ordinary artificial light has a frequency, and that frequency changes depending on where in the world you happen to be. In Europe, electricity is at 50 Hz. In America, it's at 60 Hz. So if you're having a problem with strobing lights, switch this setting to 50 or 60 Hz, depending on where you are. Time-lapse videos are basically created by shooting with a very slow frame rate and then playing back faster. Normally, we would choose something like 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. But as you can see at the top, we have 1 frame per second up to 1 frame per minute. Using one of the middle settings here will give you a nice time-lapse, with clouds scudding across the sky. 1 frame a minute is really for long periods, like if you want to capture a whole day or many hours and compress it. 1 frame per minute filmed for 24 hours, then played back at 24 frames per second, will give you 60 seconds of video. I think, correct me if I'm wrong. So set your frame rate, then set your playback speed. But don't forget, make sure to lock your exposure before you start recording. Otherwise, you'll get the exposure constantly changing and it doesn't look as smooth. If you have an external mic plugged in, FiLMiC Pro should automatically choose that mic. But in this menu, you have the option to switch them. If you have an iPhone or iPad, there's a lot more options. You can switch between available mics. Below that, you can choose the audio codec. Below that, you can set the audio quality. There's 44.1 kHz and 48 kHz. There's basically very little quality difference between those two settings. Now, FiLMiC says that with a supported external Lightning microphone, you can get a 96 kHz option. Toggle on video only if you want no audio to be recorded. If you toggle on voice processing, FiLMiC Pro will add a filter to enhance the spoken voice. In Android, headphone monitoring allows you to monitor the audio via a connected Bluetooth headset. In iOS, you get the option to toggle on a Bluetooth microphone. And when you toggle on automatic gain correction, your audio level will be adjusted automatically. If you toggle it off, then you cannot use the audio gain slider to adjust level. FiLMiC says that with iOS devices, simply connecting a Bluetooth headset via your iPhone will automatically allow it to be used for monitoring, so no need for a switch in iOS. Now, this menu looks pretty different depending on your device. In iOS, we have Save to Camera Roll. As I said previously, this saves your clips to the Photos app section of your iPhone or iPad. However, FiLMiC recommends that we save to the FiLMiC Pro folder rather than the Photos location. Both Android and iOS have a remote control option. If you toggle this on, you can connect using the FiLMiC Remote app, which is a separate purchase. FiLMiC Remote allows you to monitor and control FiLMiC Pro from a second device, like another smartphone for example. If you toggle this on in iOS, the Remote Preview Only option becomes available. Toggle this on if you only want to allow FiLMiC Remote to monitor your device, but not control it. This way you will keep control of FiLMiC Pro on the first device and allow someone to watch via a second. For example, if you had a DOP operating the first device and the director watching via the second. Both iOS and Android allow you to toggle on orientation lock, and all this does is lock FiLMiC Pro in either landscape or portrait. So now you can happily move the camera around without it switching. Both iOS and Android allow you to toggle on Stitch Recorded Footage. So this enables you to pause and resume recording. Basically, it still records separate clips, but then edits them all together into one clip. With this switched on, you will need to long press the record button to stop recording. Otherwise, it will just pause and resume again. In iOS devices, you have a snap focus option, and this makes the focus reticle more responsive. So if you want the focus to adapt more quickly to changes, perhaps filming sports or live events, toggle this on. Android devices have a GPS tagging option. Toggle on to tag your clips with location information. Both Android and iOS have the option to switch off preview. This removes the preview from the screen. Why would we want to do that? Well, perhaps the light from the screen is spilling into a shot and disturbing the lighting of the location. If you enable Tap to Hide Interface, you can hide the interface to get a cleaner monitor. If hidden, you now get the option to hide the reticles as well, using the switch below that. Both iOS and Android have the option to hide the zoom rocker. If, like me, you rarely ever use it, then why not remove it and give yourself a slightly cleaner screen? And also, you might want to avoid accidentally knocking the zoom, so if you remove it from the screen, that isn't going to happen. In Android, you can opt to mute notifications. And now when you're filming, you won't be disturbed every time someone likes your behind-the-scenes Facebook post. By default, both iOS and Android allow you to use the volume keys to start and stop recording. Disable this if you find yourself accidentally hitting it. Also, sometimes the volume keys get pressed by a clamp, like when you're using a gimbal. So switching this off would solve that issue. Android now has two very useful settings not available to iOS: noise reduction and sharpness. So if you want that soft film look, disable sharpness. Some people also film with noise reduction completely off, and then apply noise reduction in post. However, I usually set this to fast. Now, if you switch to fast, FiLMiC Pro will prioritize frame rate over noise reduction. If you set it to high quality, FiLMiC Pro prioritizes noise reduction, which means your frame rate might suffer. So if you are having frame rate problems, switch it to fast or off. In this setting, FiLMiC Pro allows you to save certain settings. Let's say you were shooting at 4K at 24 frames per second, and you were using an Anamorphic De-Squeeze. You can save it and recall it here. So that will save you time if you have various settings that you use a lot. On iOS devices, this menu is quite simple. First, there's the timecode track toggle switch. When enabled, the app embeds a timecode track into your video based on the time the clip is shot. This allows multiple videos shot simultaneously to be edited together quickly based on a common timecode track. On Android devices, you get 3 different settings at the top. If you have extra memory installed in your smartphone, like an SD card, you might want to have clips saved to this card. Once installed, you should be able to tap where it says internal storage and switch to external storage, which will be the SD card. Toggle this switch on to limit clips to a maximum of 4 GB. If you are recording and you go over 4 GB, FiLMiC Pro will simply start a new clip. You can then stitch them together later. I'm not sure, but I believe that some Android devices, particularly Samsung's, had a 4 GB file size limit imposed. But presumably I wouldn't have the option to turn this off if I could only record 4 GB maximum on my Note 20. SMB network backup allows your device to connect to a Samba network, so I believe this allows you to back up files. If your Android is connected to a Samba network, then it should appear here. Once connected, toggle on Auto Backup to immediately share files to the network. So the main purpose of this menu is content management. Toggle on, and now you can set a name for the production, a scene name, and a start number for takes. Then every shot you record will have these included in the name of the file. Takes will automatically increase by 1 each clip, whereas by default, FiLMiC Pro uses date and time to create a series of numbers for the file. The hardware menu gives you a bunch of settings related to any extra kit you have attached to your device: lenses, drives, gimbals, and so on. Toggle clean HDMI out to output a clean video feed to an external display. You will need a compatible HDMI adapter to make this work. For iOS, you can also include audio into this feed. This can be used for live streaming and broadcast. For example, you could have a number of devices connected via HDMI to some kind of multicam studio. Now, this isn't good for recording video to an external drive though. For that, it's best to stick with your internal drive or SD card. You'll find options here to connect to supported 3-axis gimbals. And currently, FiLMiC Pro have DJI Osmo, which would work for numbers 1 all the way to 4, Xeon Smooth 4, and Movi Cinema Robot. So make sure your gimbal is connected to your device via Bluetooth, and then toggle on the appropriate switch. FiLMiC Pro should locate and connect to the gimbal. You'll now be able to use the gimbal controls to operate FiLMiC Pro. Below that, we have 2 options to de-squeeze video when using an anamorphic conversion lens. These lenses give you a distinctive widescreen look. and work by squeezing a wider horizon into the regular 16:9 frame. Toggle on and FiLMiC Pro will de-squeeze for you and save you having to do this in post. If you would actually prefer to de-squeeze in post, you can additionally toggle on the preview only. Now you can monitor what it will actually look like finally, but it will save the squeezed video version. The 35mm adapter setting flips the image vertically. You need this when using a depth of field adapter, like the ones from Ulanzi or Beast Grip, because they create an upside down image. There's also a horizontal image flip option. You might want to use this if you're shooting with a selfie camera, which usually reverses the image. You can use FiLMiC SYNC to store and recover preset data. So if you have some settings saved, they can be stored here and used later. Perhaps you might want to transfer them to one or more devices. Any device you use, if you log in with the same details, you'll be able to access those stored settings. The community button simply gives you access to FiLMic's website, links, social media, and contact details. And FirstLight is an app by FiLMiC for shooting stills rather than video. Now, this simply switches stabilization on or off. FiLMiC say that the app will use the highest level of stabilization that's available to the app. The camera menu gives you access to your device's lenses, so front and back, and in this device I also get access to the ultra-wide lens. However, FiLMiC Pro does not give access to the telephoto in my Note 20 Ultra, so performance may vary there depending on your device. The torch button simply turns your device's flashlight on and off. With iOS, you get a choice of brightness levels as well. This might be useful for on-the-fly filming, such as interviewing people in the street. The guide button toggles on and off some framing guides, which divide your frame into 3 sections. So you can use this if you want to apply the rule of thirds composition theory. And the last button accesses links to a quick start guide, tutorials, user manual, support page, and it also lets you know which version of the app you have installed. So that's the settings menu done. Let's move on. In the center at the bottom, we have this oblong shape with a few different meters and controls. As I mentioned before, you can use the tiny white line to set audio level. The 6 zeros are the timecode counter. When you start recording, this will start counting, letting you know the duration elapsed. To the right, we have the battery level indicator. Below that is the storage level indicator. If the memory on your device starts to get used up, slices of the pie get eaten, as well as turning the pie from green to orange and finally to red. If it gets to red, then you will probably need to move or delete files to make space. On the left, we have the current frames per second and resolution settings. Now, if you tap the timecode counter, it switches to a luminosity histogram, giving you an indication of luminosity levels in the frame. White and highlights are on the right, while black and shadows are on the left. Tap again to get the same histogram, but split into component RGB levels. One more tap and you get the waveform monitor. So this is like the RGB histogram we just saw, except it indicates levels along the width of the frame. So if you move the camera left to right, the waveform moves with it. And this also gives you an indication of the brightness. Black is at the bottom and white is at the top. If the light is too bright for the sensor, it will blow out and you can see the levels pushed up to the top. Anything beyond that top line is lost forever. Same with the bottom. If it's so dark that it's black, you will never recover image information from there. Tap once more and you'll find yourself back at the timecode counter. The button made up of 3 colored circles opens the imaging panel. And then you have 3 further panels to choose from. There's white balance, tone for log settings, and color behavior. The top panel is for setting and locking white balance. The big square is a combination of white balance and tint. What is white balance? White balance is what we deal with when we want our colors in the image to represent as close as possible the colors in real life. It's called white balance because the camera uses white as a reference. In other words, if you say to your camera, "This is white," then the camera should be able to set the balance of hues correctly so that everything looks natural. Skin looks natural, the sky looks natural, grass looks green, not blue, and so on. If you use your native camera app in auto mode, the camera software takes a reading and usually does a pretty good job. Problem is, when you move the camera, the color balance can change during the shot. On the other hand, a professional camera operator would set white balance and lock it before recording. Now, this big square has a dot located somewhere inside its borders that can be used to set white balance. If you tap and drag it around, you can see colors changing. And this is actually a combination of color temperature measured in kelvins combined with a color tint. To the right, you see these two values represented in separate columns. So you can use these columns to set temperature and tint separately. Rather than set the white balance using the camera's sensor, you can use a preset. There's a row of 4 preset icons at the bottom: the light bulb, tungsten, sun, daylight, cloud, which is for cloudy skies, and what looks like a modern energy-saving bulb, which is for fluorescent lighting. So if you're filming under those light conditions, you can try using these presets to get a good natural color balance. If you're using 2 or more cameras, for example, you'll probably want them set to the same white balance. And therefore, if you use the same preset on both cameras, that's a quick way to make sure they're both the same. To the right of the preset icons are 2 letters, A and B. And these letters can be used to store custom presets. Hold your finger on the letter and an option to save the current settings pops up. The final WB button is probably the most important because when it's blue it is in auto mode. One tap makes it red, which is completely locked. Tap again to switch to lock on record. And this means white balance will be on auto until you start recording, and then it locks for the duration of the shot, which is a good option for more professional footage, but with a bit less fuss. You don't have to keep setting white balance manually every shot. The next tab down is the Cinematographer's Kit. This is an in-app purchase, and if you haven't paid for it, then you'll be prompted to do so. And if you want to shoot with a log profile using FiLMiC Pro, this is where it happens. With the introduction of 10-bit recording, it now tells you if you have 8 or 10 bits selected. If your device is capable, then you can switch to 10-bit color in the resolution menu, and I explained how to do that earlier in this video. Using iOS devices, this tab has 4 curves to choose from: natural, linear, hybrid log gamma, and FiLMic's log version 2 or log version 3, depending on whether you have 8 or 10-bit color selected. Log version 2 is 8-bit and log version 3 is 10-bit. Using Android devices, these options may differ. On my Samsung Note 20 Ultra, I have 5 curves. When 8-bit is selected, I have native, natural, dynamic, flat, and log version 2. When 10-bit is selected, however, I have the same, except dynamic is now switched to linear, and log version 2 is instead log version 3. In Android, the native curve uses dynamic tone mapping. And that's why it says here that Cinematographer Kit tools are not compatible with that setting. As soon as I select one of these curves, that message pops up again, dynamic tone mapping disabled. Natural is FiLMiC Pro's standard color profile. It seems to just switch off dynamic tone mapping and nothing else. In the FiLMiC Pro manual, it says, for professionals performing color grading in post-production, the log will offer the most aggressive capabilities, but at the greater possibility of increased noise or other flaws. I often get questions about shooting in log, about the extra noise experienced compared to shooting with the native app, sometimes even without the log profile. What I would say is that when shooting in log, you have much less margin of error when setting your ISO. Some users tell me they only shoot log in the daylight, where they can reduce ISO to the minimum. So my advice is, if you want to be able to shoot with a higher ISO, therefore giving you greater flexibility, don't shoot in log. Below the curves is a tool for customizing each curve by adjusting the black, mid and white point. If I slide up the black point, then blacks become grey. If I slide down the white point, then whites become grey. Below that we have 2 sliders which allow further customization by adjusting the highlights and shadows. For example, bringing down the highlights or pushing up the shadows would decrease contrast even further. And finally, if you just want to reset everything, it's all gone to hell and you want to start from the beginning, tap the 2 arrows in a circle button in the top left. In this panel, you can customize the look of your video even further. This is like grading, but before you shoot the video rather than after. First, there's 3 color sliders: red, green, and blue. You can adjust each of these, just slide along the color left and right. By default, they are set to max, so it's a case of removing an amount of whichever color you work on. If you pull back the red, things generally go a bit more blue. If you pull back the blue, the image becomes a bit warmer. Then below these settings you have vibrance and saturation sliders. You might be more used to seeing these kinds of settings in an editing app. What's the difference between saturation and vibrance? Well, while saturation boosts color in general, vibrance only adjusts the least saturated colors in the image. In other words, vibrance is a bit more subtle, and it can be used to bring out otherwise dull colors. So that's just about it. There's just a couple of little things to mention to do with the interface. If your screen allows, you might have this extra strip on the left. At the top we have some letters, and these indicate the bitrate setting, like FiLMiC Extreme, or FiLMiC Quality, or Standard. Below that is a number, and this is the amount of minutes of video you can record before your memory is full. Obviously this number will vary depending on your memory and video quality settings. Higher resolution and bitrate means less minutes. And last of all, in the bottom left corner is the current color temperature in kelvins. And my voice is now almost finished, but I hope you enjoyed or found parts or all of this video useful, and I hope to see you in the next video.